So yeah, so welcome, Cisa, as well. Good to have you on the call again.
Hello.
So, hello, nice to see you. Happy New Year. Um, so yeah, let's dive in. So this is something that we've been working on for a few months, and we've called it the Growth Cultures Insight Report. And really, the goal is so every year, I'm sure you see this as well. You see these lists of organisations who make the top 10, top 20, top 50 of brilliant workplaces or workplace cultures specifically. And it's great, and like, everyone celebrates. But then I'm always thinking, yeah, but what do they do? What do they actually do in the day to day that makes them stand out? So this piece of research that I wanted to do really was to kind of get under the skin a bit more of some of those standout workplace cultures, to pinpoint some of the things, the behaviours, the habits, the actions that actually make this a great experience for their employees. So what we've done is taken the list of, it's actually the top 20 Glassdoor, they were UK based organisations in 2025. So that you can see that online, it's publicly accessible. It has organisations like Diageo, EasyJet, ARM, to name a few. There are many others too. You can see them all. And it's all publicly accessible. So you can see their reviews. If you click in, you can see what people are saying, both positively and negatively, about how it feels to work here. And obviously, Glassdoor are saying, based on that, here are the ones that we think are giving the standout experiences. So what we have done is said, okay, let's try and take that to the next level and actually get a bit more specific about what are they shaping and how are they achieving that. So we've overlaid the Make It Human models. So a couple of them. So we're looking at growth cultures in terms of 5 elements, and some of you may well remember those from previous sessions or tools and things that you've looked at. So what are the how are organizations able to create environments where people and organizations can grow sustainably? And we see there's 5 elements that they are focused on. So we're looking at those. We're also looking at some of the early signs that things could be teetering off a bit, the culture cracks that creep in, the small behaviors that, if we don't address them, can mean that we veer off course. So we've mapped every single one of those comments. So we took the most recent 200 comments from each of those organizations, which gave us 4,000 review comments to look at. And then when we mapped them, it created this much bigger database because they could map in several ways. So we got a data set of over 13,000 comments once we'd mapped it. So it's trying to bring some structure, some objectivity to actually what is fueling this. And what I wanted to do today is just give you a sense of some of those headlines ahead of the report coming out, and then you can have a look at that in more depth. And as I said, in upcoming sessions, we can then dive in and explore that in a bit more depth as it starts to circulate and people get more familiar with it. Hopefully that makes sense in terms of what we're doing. I should have said as well, if you want to ask questions, feel free to interrupt me. And if you prefer, just write it in the chat and we can come to that when we get to the discussion. So let me share some of the findings that we were seeing. And I've got 4 headlines to share with you. So, first headline is around this. Though culture matters, but intentional focus is really what turns it into a competitive advantage. So that's what we're seeing differentiating actually the best of the best. And I'll explain that in a moment a little bit more. But what you can see on the slide here is a snapshot view of those top 20 organizations, and actually at a high level, what is driving the experiences that people are having in those organizations? What's driving a strong culture? And a few things stand out. So first of all, when we looked at all of those 5 elements, so workplace, accountability, community, empowerment, and growth, so those 5 elements in a growth culture, the average overall score was around 56%. And you might think, that's quite average, really. These are the top organizations. And I kind of thought that originally. I thought, oh, okay, that's quite average. But actually, I think what it's really showing us is a couple of things. One, just how challenging it is to shape a comprehensive, really healthy and growth focused organization and to maintain it, because we know things are going to shift, things are going to evolve. Um, but also that there are different flavors that come through in how people are doing this. So what we're seeing in terms of what stands out is that these organizations are really focused on shaping strong communities. So places where people feel a sense of belonging, they're part of something, they are cared for. Empathy is something that really comes through. So in some daily experiences, I know someone cares about me. I know that I'm valued here. That is something that really flows through a lot of the very positive comments. But actually, I think the most interesting thing about this part is what differentiates the top five. So the top five in the top 20 we pulled out versus the bottom five. And actually, what we found was differentiating them was there was a 12% difference in score. So the top five are scoring 12% higher overall. But in particular, where they're differentiating is around things like ownership, trust, psychological safety, inclusion, those aspects that actually are probably a bit harder. These are the harder things to create. And that is reflected in some of the high level results. So, whilst we're seeing community as a really strong driver, accountability and empowerment are emerging as some gaps. So I think the big kind of takeaway here is that community is really important in positive workplace cultures. This helps them to stand out. That's kind of a really great basis for building a strong culture. But actually, what helps you stand out and get more of a competitive advantage is when you can tackle and shape proactively some of these harder things. So, do people feel trusted? Do they feel a sense of ownership? Do they feel they can share ideas and challenge things, or raise their hand and talk about difficult topics? And that really is what's separating some of the kind of real top workplace cultures. So that's the first headline. So yeah, feel free to ask questions or put stuff in the chat if you want to, if stuff's popping into your head. The second headline then goes into it a little bit more in terms of what's actually shaping the positive experiences that people are having. And I've talked about that a little bit already. But what you can see here on the slide in the light blue, the kind of turquoise color, is the percentage of positive comments. So it's been stat ranked by positive comments at the top, and everyday learning is really standing out as a frequent positive driver of experiences, as is empathy and care and collaboration and connection. So you can see, some of those community aspects that we're seeing as an overall theme jumping out, and seeing what is driving that more specifically. And I think, if you think about that day to day, and you may well have experiences and examples of this, that when you see great cultures in action, they are really good at facilitating opportunities and moments for people to do these things. So to share recent experiences, to share learnings. They've got strong habits in place to help and encourage people to do those sorts of things. And they do it so that they can collaborate, so that they can feel part of something, so that they can learn and develop and grow from each other. So yeah, I think it's really quite clear that actually the big difference here is what's happening in the day to day and how we enable that. So I think a lot of this actually is probably more about managers and local leaders who are setting the tone and creating opportunities for these aspects. I just saw a question, I think, pop in. Let me just have a quick look. Out of interest, is there any data available regarding community relating to physical workspace, physical workplace and community, online-based community? So there is, so yeah, so workplace, which is one of the 5 areas, zooms in on that a little bit more. So in terms of the kind of equipment that people have, and are they coming into a regular workspace more often or not. And yes, I think there are some themes that emerge around that, and also in a sense of community, in that, obviously we have to be more deliberate in how we're shaping connection and maintaining connection when we've got dispersed teams. So for some organizations that was more prevalent than others based on what mandates they've had in place. But I think really what it comes down to is actually it's these small habits, these day-to-day examples and ways of working that become more important. But yeah, it's a good point to raise. Okay, so that's the second finding. The third finding looks then more at what's shaping the negative experiences, because when you look at reviews and things, you do get quite a lot of negative commentary, even in the best ones, because as humans we like that. We like to have a little bit of a vent, and in some ways that is helpful to the individual to do it. But what we've tried to do is cut through some of that and really pull out what are the themes behind that. And there are some key themes that emerge. Just have a little sip of tea. The themes that emerge really are primarily linked to the 2 areas that overall are coming out as bigger gaps to close, so accountability and empowerment. But really some of the things that are driving that are a lack of clarity and consistency. So that's a big driver of negative experiences. And you can really feel that. I'm sure you might feel that in your roles, in your teams. It's so complicated, our day-to-day lives, our organizations, that very often people, I think, are sitting there thinking, I don't quite know what I am supposed to be doing. I don't quite know how I contribute. And that also relates to things like prioritization, workloads that pile up. And I think the hybrid aspect plays in here as well, where you've got people who are dispersed, who are sitting there working away, working hard, but perhaps haven't had the guidance or realization of what is most important now. Where should I be spending my time? So you end up people piling on the hours and getting lost and overloaded. So that's a key theme. And linked to that also is kind of a lack of clarity around decision ownership. So also, who makes the decision here? Am I able to make a decision here, or should I pass this up the chain? And I think very often this emerges as a challenge because we don't proactively talk about it. We make assumptions. We go, okay, here's the task, off you go and do it. But we haven't got into the so how and with who and by when, and that's when things get confusing and things get misaligned, and people can disappear into spirals of overwork or heading in the wrong direction. Other things that are bubbling away are a perceived lack of fairness and double standards, and we'll see a bit more of that shortly. And also, I think linked to clarity is a limited feeling of transparency, feeling that things are being held back, that we're being protected as employees, that there's not an openness around sharing information more freely. And I think a big takeaway here is that actually these things really matter, because when you don't have clarity, when you don't have decision ownership, when things feel a little bit murky and unclear, it slows things down. It creates some blockers and some barriers. So fixing these frictions are really important because they can unlock a lot of the outcomes that we know as teams and as organizations we need to drive. So even in top organizations, these things are bubbling away, and they're things that can get in the way of us sustaining performance. So that's the third one. I'll just share the final one with you, and then we can have a bit of a conversation about it. So the fourth one then looks at where are there issues that are bubbling that could, if they're not addressed, turn into something that is a bit more damaging for people and for organizations. And the fourth headline really is that there are hidden risks. Even in great workplace cultures, we've got to continue to work hard to balance out and to address some of these things that are simmering away. So we found that there are signs of early stage culture cracks across these organizations. The biggest one, perhaps unsurprisingly, I don't think I was necessarily surprised by this, is something we called so busy, which really is that overload, overwork, when it becomes normal to work every hour that you can because you see everyone else around you, or the expectations are unclear, so the work piles up. So you can see how these things interact. So that really is a big theme that's coming through for uh, all of these organizations. And then the other thing that's bubbling up is really around double standards. So the experience that, there's one rule for me and something for another one for someone else, particularly between leaders and the whole organization. So those differences are talked about and they're felt and they're experienced. And in addition to that, some tolerance of poor behavior. So we see that and hear that all the time, and we are, you can see why people do it. They see somebody deliver some strong results, or they're a real star performer, and they know that perhaps they haven't done it in quite the way you want them to, or perhaps they've brushed some people up the wrong way or caused some conflict or friction along the way, and you choose to turn a blind eye. You go, they've done this, that's okay. But that speaks volumes across the organization, and people talk about these things. And that, can really create a drag, can erode some of the good stuff that you're shaping in your culture. So I think the big takeaway here for leaders around this is that we can't dismiss these things like overload of workload, about how people behave when they're under pressure, or experiences of fairness. We can't dismiss them as personal issues, well, that individual just needs to work on this and that, or they need to become more resilient. They are strategic level risks. If these multiply up and are not addressed, then they are detracting from a positive and healthy culture that is going to fuel growth. So I think there's some key messages here for us more broadly, because this is a slice of some organisations, but it will be representative of the broader position, I'm sure. So those are the four key headlines. Let me just share what's coming next. So you'll be able to download the whole report from next week, which includes a lot more insight and some suggestions on actions as well. As I said, I'll run some other sessions and we can dive into some of those actions a bit more. I think in particular around accountability and empowerment, and how we actually move the needle in some of those spaces. But it's also got cuts of data by industry type, size of organization. So there's some other things to really dive into and explore. And I'll be going through a lot more of that in a bit more depth in a webinar on the 4th of February. So come along to that. And just a quick heads up also, that if you want to learn, or someone in your team or your network who wants to learn how to actually shape a growth culture where we've got all of these elements working really well, how to maintain it, how to build it, then you could join one of our learning classes. So the Accelerator, which is more suited for people who have ownership for culture. So that's like an 8-week online virtual cohort program. And also the Masterclass, which is more light touch. It's a 3-hour online class where you get an upgrade really on knowledge, skills, and a toolkit that you can take away and start using. So there we go. There's a bit of a whistle stop tour with some four headlines. I will stop sharing, and I'll also stop recording, and then see any thoughts that people have.